So, what happens when a billionaire's missing wife is just the tip of a massive geopolitical iceberg? It's a question that honestly sounds like it was pulled straight out of tonight's breaking news alerts. But today, it's actually the foundation of our mission briefing. Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining us because today we are unraveling a story that just masterfully blurs that line between high society scandals and high-stakes global warfare. Our target dossier today is Daniel Silva's newest international thriller, Ransom. Now get this. This marks the staggering 26th entry in the acclaimed Gabriel Allon series. For those of you keeping track of Silva's really impressive career, you already know he has this uncanny knack for pulling the most anxiety-inducing geopolitical realities right into his fiction. But how does he keep the tension so sharp after 26 books? Well, we're going to map out exactly how he pulls it off in this latest installment.
All right, let's pull up Section 1. Intel Report Part 1, The Missing Socialite.
Okay, let's dive into this by examining the inciting incident. Because in classic espionage fashion, the real danger is almost always hidden behind a very glamorous, very distracting curtain. Our target here is Alice Winter. She's this dazzling British socialite, an online influencer with literally millions of followers, and, crucially, the wife of our client, billionaire real estate baron Edward Knight. So, Alice vanishes without a trace while on this annual holiday in Ibiza with 3 old friends from Cambridge. Edward Knight is obviously desperate. He completely bypasses traditional law enforcement and goes straight to the legendary Gabriel Allon. Now, Gabriel is supposed to be enjoying a peaceful retirement, right? Just focusing on his work as an art restorer. In fact, he only gets drawn into Knight's orbit to speak at a lavish arts fundraiser, but Knight begs him, in total confidence, to find Alice. And Gabriel is incredibly reluctant. He actually gave his wife Chiara strict orders not to act as a bagman, promising her that he'd left that dangerous world totally behind. But, well, as we know, the shadows always find a way to pull him back.
And this is right where the standard kidnapping protocol goes completely, unpredictably sideways. A ransom demand comes in. Gabriel steps up, negotiates, and goes to personally deliver the money. But instead of a clean exchange, Gabriel himself is kidnapped. Things go terribly wrong, and then, bizarrely enough, he's just dumped on the side of a road. And the absolute most chilling part? Step 4, Alice is still missing. Gabriel found her, only to lose her all over again. The kidnappers have the cash, but they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Why let Gabriel go? As he starts digging into this chaotic timeline, Gabriel realizes that finding Alice might actually be the absolute least of their problems.
Moving on to Section 2, Intel Report Part 2, A Web of Russian Oligarchs.
This brings us right to the escalation phase of our briefing. What started as a missing person case rapidly transforms into this deadly race against the clock. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive scope shift that Silva is famous for. What initially looks like a financially motivated crime, the standard kidnapping of a wealthy woman, completely masks the true terrifying threat. We're talking about a rogue Russian GRU plot to assassinate European leaders using drone technology over their support for Ukraine. It is state-sponsored terrorism masquerading as a domestic crime, which is a scenario that feels, frankly, chillingly plausible if you just look at our current global news cycle. So you're probably wondering, how on earth does a British real estate baron get tangled up with Russian military intelligence? Well, Knight wasn't exactly truthful with Gabriel. See, during a massive real estate slump, Knight's investments took an absolute beating. He was desperate. Then, a man approached him with a huge check. It looked like a total lifeline. But that money actually came from heavily sanctioned, fabulously wealthy Russian oligarchs closely tied to Vladimir Putin. It was an instant fix that basically created this mafia-like self-perpetuating grip. Fast forward, and his partners don't want his money anymore. They want his influence. Knight has basically become incredibly useful to some very, very bad actors. To counter a threat of this magnitude, Gabriel has to assemble a pretty formidable allied team. To expose the unknown mastermind, they decide to set a trap, disguising it as a high-stakes art auction at Knight's grand estate. Joining Gabriel are some real fan favorites. We've got Danish pickpocket and hacker Ingrid Johansson, former CIA operative Sarah Bancroft, and heavy hitters from British intelligence, like SIS Director General Graham Seymour, plus Christopher Keller and Nigel Whitcomb. Now, it's worth pointing out, reviewers at the Cypher Brief noted one major, much-missed absence here: Gabriel's classic, colorful team of Mossad operatives. They've been mostly missing in action since his 2023 novel The Collector, and longtime fans definitely feel that gap. But honestly, the allied team he does put together here executes an absolute masterclass in tradecraft.
Let's shift gears for Section 3, The Architect: How Silva Writes a Thriller.
I want to step out of the shadowy world of espionage for just a second and talk about the creator himself. Because crafting a complex interwoven plot like this, one that so flawlessly integrates AI, first-person view mosquito drones, and high-level geopolitical tension, that is no small feat. So how does Silva do it year after year? Well, I love this quote from his recent interview on Good Morning America. He actually mentioned that one of his literary heroes, Muriel Spark, only needed to know the title and her own name before starting a book. Silva joked he needs a little more than that, usually seeing about 80 pages in his head before he even starts typing. But to maintain his crazy book-a-year system, he just embraces the chaos. Like he says here, he writes an undisciplined first draft that kind of acts as a giant outline. Then he hands it over to his wife, television journalist Jamie Gangle, who ruthlessly cuts about 100 pages right out of it. It's such a fantastic, humorous peek behind the curtain. It really humanizes the intense, meticulously plotted spycraft we read on the page. Just goes to show, even grandmasters need a really good editor, right?
Finally, we reach Section 4, the debrief, the critical consensus.
Which brings us to the final phase of our explainer today. We've gathered intel from top literary critics across Read-A-Da, The Moving Words, Book Reporter, and The Cipher Brief to see how this 26th mission actually holds up out in the wild. So, the crucial point is balancing the execution. Looking at the strengths, critics unanimously praise Silva's breathless pacing and that incredibly rich, polished European atmosphere he's known for. He just effortlessly captures the dissonance between European and US leaders regarding Russia. And those geopolitical threats, specifically his use of AI and drone technology, they feel terrifyingly plausible. Plus, he layers in some really sharp social commentary on the dark underbelly of social media fame and unchecked wealth. Now, on the weaknesses side, Read-A-Da points out that the series kind of knows its own moves a bit too well, relying on some familiar structural tropes. You know, the retired spy pulled back in by a personal connection. The Moving Words noted some pretty dense, heavy exposition in the opening chapters detailing all those financial networks, which kind of slows the momentum early on. And as we mentioned earlier, that beloved Mossad team is notably missing.
But despite those minor reservations, the final consensus is incredibly strong. It's hovering right around a solid 4 across the board. Rita awards it a solid 4 out of 5. The Moving Words actually pushes it to a 4.5 out of 5. And the national security experts over at the Cipher Brief, they give it their highly coveted rating of 4 out of 4 trench coats. Across the board, critics entirely agree that Ransom is a deeply polished, highly intelligent read that proves Silva is still operating at absolute peak form. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. Is a familiar formula a comfort or a curse for a 26-book series? I mean, for newcomers, Ransom offers a total masterclass in thriller craft. For the veterans who have read all 25 previous books, sure, it might feel a bit like a well-worn path dressed up as suspense. But perhaps, in a wildly unpredictable world, a hero who consistently outsmarts the darkest geopolitical threats is exactly the kind of comfort we crave right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this briefing on The Explainer. Keep questioning the shadows, and I'll catch you next time.